Welcome back to another session. In this lecture, we will examine the concept of bilateral investment cooperation, also known as BIT, bilateral investment treaties, and how China has developed its own bilateral investment treaties network to promote and enhance the growth of Chinese overseas foreign direct investments. For the purpose of clarity, we will be approaching this lecture from three sections. First, we will provide a brief overview and summary to the concept of bilateral investment cooperation or treaties. Second, we will look at the effect these treaties have on participating countries. Lastly, we will conclude by looking at China's BIT network, most recently, the China-EU agreement that was just signed and concluded after 7 years of negotiation. What is a bilateral investment agreement? According to the United Nations Center for Trade and Development, a bilateral investment treaty is an agreement between two countries regarding promotion and protection of investments made by investors from respective countries in each other's territory. It is a series of special clauses on mutual investment signed between two countries. It is the most common international agreement in the field of international investment. By signing corresponding agreements, foreign investors can be given rights and interests that are different from domestic investors. Once dispute arises, they can be adjusted through good mechanisms to protect the interests of foreign investors from losses. Signing bilateral investment agreements has become an important way for countries to attract foreign direct investments. Bilateral investment agreements have been signed for more than 50 years. However, only in the 90s was there a significant expansion in the number of signed agreements. As of September 2018, a total of 2,952 bilateral investment agreements have been signed, in which 2,358 are in force. As any international treaty, bilateral investment agreements must be ratified by the signatories so that they can produce the expected effects within the national territory of each signatory country. For this reason, once signed, these agreements will have to follow a ratification process which will vary between the countries since it is established by each country's internal legal system. To further understand how BIA is played today, let's look at how it has evolved over time. The origin of the bilateral investment regime is in the post-World War II era and was initiated by the United States in the late 1940s, with the negotiation of the so-called New Treaties of Friendship, Commerce, and Navigation, the FCNs. However, in the late 1940s, after the Second World War, new bilateral FCN treaties would concentrate on the rights and privileges of foreign investments to stimulate international capital flows by creating a general regulatory framework for foreign commerce and investments. In 1962, the United Nations Resolution N 1803 was signed. The resolution codifies the principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, providing newly independent countries with a legal shield against the property or contract right claims of foreign companies or states. Even with Resolution N 1803, many developing countries saw this balance as ambiguous and sought a new equilibrium. In the 1970s, developing countries called for a new international economic order with complete national control over foreign corporations and the freedom to nationalize or expropriate foreign property according to national rules, which culminated in the United Nations Resolutions N 3281, a charter of economic rights and duties of states. In the 1990s, the attraction of foreign investment became prominent, and the 1974 charter was replaced by a large web of BITs as the prevailing text in the sphere of international investment law. With the knowledge of the origin and evolution of BIs, there are also several types of bilateral investments. Here, we'll be looking at these three types, namely friendship, commerce, and navigation treaties, investment guarantee agreements, agreement for promotion and protection of investment. We will briefly examine these types of bilateral investment in detail and see what they really entail. Friendship, commerce, and navigation treaties. This is mainly to establish a friendly relationship between the contracting states, and both sides should give due protection to the nationals of other parties to encourage and engage in commercial activities, and given the freedom to navigate. Although there are provisions on investment protection, The important thing is to protect maritime trade, not to protect investors. Investment Guarantee Agreement. This model was established by the United States. Since then, countries that have established overseas investment insurance system have followed suit, which is also called the Bilateral Investment Agreement of the United States. It is characterized by its emphasis on providing guarantee for political risks in international investment activities, especially combining with overseas investment insurance systems of domestic countries to provide premise and guarantee under international law. Let's quickly examine the main context of an investment guarantee agreement. This will help us further break down the details of this type of BIA. Insurance coverage. Political risk. Political risk refers to any kind of political events such as war, terrorist activities, government changes, and third country interventions, which result in the loss of potential profit or assets of an international investment due to the discontinuity caused by political factors. Usually, we can classify political risk from the perspective of norms, influence level, risk sources, traditional and non-traditional. Right of subrogation. Subrogation is one of the basic principles of insurance. The insurer exercises the right to claim compensation from the third party on behalf of the insured. If the insured accident is caused by the third party's damage to the subject matter of the insurance, the insurer shall, from the date of making compensation to the insured, obtain subrogation to exercise the right of the insured to claim compensation against the third party within the scope of compensation. There are three main reasons. 1. Tort. The loss of the subject matter insured is caused by the intentional or negligent act of a third party. 2. Contractual liability. The third party's breach of contract results in the loss of the subject matter insured. 3. Unjust enrichment. The subrogation recovery caused by the civil liability caused by the third party's unjust enrichment. The amount of the insurer's subrogation claim is limited to the amount of the insurance indemnity. If the amount obtained from the third party exceeds the amount of the indemnity, the insurer shall repay the insured. Settlement of disputes between state parties. As one of the main forms of international investment agreements, bilateral investment agreements have their own advantages, such as less countries involved in negotiations, and the contracting parties can adjust and change the terms and specific contents according to their own needs, capacity levels, and policy objectives, so they are developing most rapidly in all international investment agreements. Agreement for Promotion and Protection of Investment. The model was initiated by the Federal Republic of Germany, also known as the Federal German-Style Investment Agreement. It is characterized by detailed and specific contents, focusing on the promotion and protection of private international direct investment between two countries. It contains not only substantive provisions for promoting and protecting investment, but also procedural provisions on subrogation and dispute settlement. One could say that countries decide to enter into a BIT to minimize the risk for the private corporations and home country's economy, especially when the investment will occur in poor developing countries. To increase the flow of FDI and to directly benefit from this type of investment, host countries have to reassure foreign investors that their capital will not be expropriated, directly or indirectly, after they make an investment. So what effects does this have on the participants? BITs or BIAs are an interesting protective instrument for developed economies, mainly when they're figuring as the exporter of capital, the home state. The BIT will create a safe environment for the home state's company to expand their investment in another country. This is even more relevant when the destination of the investment is a developing or underdeveloped country. In this scenario, the BIT can be an additional protection against host states' investment expropriation measures, in addition to providing an additional venue to the domestic legal system of host states, as well as protection against more corrupt states. As an important part of international investment law, bilateral investment agreements play an important role in protecting foreign investment. Hence, the positive impact of bilateral investment agreements are as follows. A good investment environment has been created for the host country. The agreement must abide by the principle of international law, which has been widely accepted by all countries. Therefore, bilateral investment agreements have strong legal binding force on the contracting states in the international community. Then, because there are only two parties to a bilateral investment agreement, it is easier to reach an agreement on the basis of equality and mutual benefit, taking into account the interest of both countries on the basis of equality and mutual benefits. Bilateral investment agreements have been widely adopted by many countries and become the most important international law system to protect investments. Bilateral investment agreements can strengthen or guarantee the effectiveness of domestic laws. Nowadays, many countries, especially developed countries, have established their own overseas investment insurance or guarantee system. They usually regard bilateral investment agreements as the legal premise of implementing their domestic and overseas investment insurance or guarantee system, making bilateral investment agreements an important international legal means to strengthen the domestic and investment measures or guarantee system. Bilateral investment agreements, especially the investment promotion and protection agreements, contain not only substantive provision on the rights and obligations of the contracting parties, but also procedural provisions on subrogation and settlement of investment disputes. They provide a legal framework for private overseas investors of both parties to establish investment relations in advance, which can avoid or reduce legal obstacles in order to ensure the stability of investment relations and promote the development of international private investment activities. It provides a strong guarantee for the proper settlement of investment disputes. Bilateral investment agreements not only prescribe the ways and procedures for settling disputes arising from the interpretation and implementation of the treaty between the contracting states, but also provide ways and procedures for the settlement of disputes arising from investment between foreign investors and the host government. In particular, most of the agreements also agree to resolve such disputes through the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, which is the proper way for investment disputes. The solution provides a strong guarantee. Some authors point out positive effects of BITs, such as how BIT can protect against entry barriers, performance requirements, foreign exchange blockage, and unfair competition from state-owned enterprises. In addition to providing for dispute resolutions, these positive effects can be experienced by the MNCs in their home countries. However, the insurgence of a direct criticism to the bilateral investment regime has become more and more common. One criticism of the BIT is the loss of sovereignty associated with the dispute settlement mechanisms. Countries are increasingly critical of both the ability of firms protected by a BIT to sue directly the host state, a mechanism that usually does not exist, to any other domestic or foreign firm in the host country, and two, the delegation of the arbitration process to third parties. Another strong criticism is that there is a significant lack of reciprocity in this type of agreements. BITs do not create responsibilities or duties for foreign investors or home states. Apart from general preamble statements encouraging foreign investment flows, nor do BITs provide host states with the capacity to bring a claim against foreign investors. BITs rarely contain an obligation for their home country to promote investment flows. Most BITs only focus on the protection of existing investments rather than the promotion of new FDI. Specifically, relating to the investment dispute settlements, Cottrell presents another downside of BITs. The investment treaty arbitration regime distorts the distinction between international and domestic law, and the separation between private and public law. The major criticism is that public good and private interests are collapsed by privatizing parts of the public interest. Even though it was largely held by many authors, the assumption that BITs promote investment has recently been called into question by numerous studies. However, some of the major problems that should be paid attention to include many difficulties in its formulation and interpretation due to the conflict of interest between developed and developing countries. 2. Bilateral trade agreement is only a special international law between two countries, which is only binding on two contracting countries. 3. In some cases, the desired results may not be achieved between the parties. Indeed, many countries still play a relevant role in terms of OFDI flows. Even though no BIT or a small number of agreements is enforced, an example is the United States, which does not have a BIT with China, the prime destination of its FDI outflows. China's rise as an economic player is causing significant power shifts in the world economy. A phenomenon demonstrating China's economic rise is its growing outward foreign direct investments. Most notably, China has been negotiating bilateral investment treaties since the end of the 90s that include far-reaching substantive and procedural investment protection. Outward FDI flow grew particularly strong from a low basis in the first half of the 90s before slowing down towards 2000 and increasing again thereafter. Especially noteworthy is the sharp increase of outward FDI flows from $12 billion in 2005 to $16 billion in 2006. China is currently the seventh largest foreign investor among developing countries in terms of stock. Accumulated outward FDI have been marginal during the first half of the 1980s, have since grown strongly and reached $73 billion in 2006. Since the opening up, China has since signed bilateral trade agreements with many countries in the world, forming a network. This network is what is called China's BIA network. The 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up policy coincides with substantial changes in China's foreign investment legal regime. The history of China's investment treaties began in 1982 when the country entered into its first bilateral investment treaty, signed between China and Sweden, and was marked by two other key dates. The 1998 entry into force of the China-Barbados BIT, in which China accepted full ICSID jurisdiction, and China's 2013 acceptance of pre-establishment national treatment and a negative least approach to exceptions. China has become the world's third largest home country, and it remains the second largest host country. Accordingly, China's government seeks to balance the protection of foreign investment with state sovereignty. China can be expected to emphasize outward FDI protection more, especially in implementing the Belt and Road Initiative. Meanwhile, it is essential for China to maintain its FDI regulatory space. Since, in 1982, China has signed bilateral trade agreements with more than 100 countries and regions, gradually forming China's BIA network. In this era of change, China's new generation of investment treaties features two more new characteristics. They're based on a balanced paradigm and are becoming more influential at the domestic level. The new generation of Chinese investment treaties is embracing a balanced paradigm to enhance investment protection and regulatory sovereignty. The exact balance that will be found in each treaty will depend on the specific circumstances and interests of the governments with which China will be negotiating its investment treaties. In terms of the total bilateral trade volume between China and major Asian countries and region, Hong Kong, Japan, and South Korea are the top three trade partners of China in Asia in 2018. Among the 11 countries in region, Indonesia has the fastest growth in total trade with China in 2018, with an increase of 23.75%. Only the total trade with Turkey declined by 10.36%. According to the statistics of the United States Department of Commerce, the volume of bilateral trade between China and the United States showed a steady growth trend from 2013 to 2018. It was only in 2016, affected by the general environment, that the import and export volumes of bilateral goods between the United States and China was $659.84 billion, an increase of 3.75%. But the growth rate was significantly lower than that in 2017. With the gradual outbreak of Sino-US trade issues, as well as the continuous promotion of trade negotiations, the volume of bilateral trade between China and the United States decreased significantly in the first quarter of 2019 by 14.9%. From 2013 to 2018, the export volume of the United States to China was relatively stable, basically maintained at about $120 billion, while the US import volume from China increased by nearly $100 billion over 6 years. In the first quarter of 2019, US exports to China were $25.9 billion, down 18.8%. US imports from China were $105.97 billion, down 13.9%. This is mainly because the US government had imposed tariffs on Chinese exports to the United States, hindering bilateral trade and investment cooperation, but also affecting market confidence and stable economic operation between the two countries as well as that of the world. In terms of the total trade volume between China and the major EU countries, in 2018, the bilateral trade volume between China and Germany was the highest, reaching 1,996.6 billion, far higher than that of other countries. In addition, from a gold rate perspective, the trade volume between China and major European foreign trade countries increased in 2018. Among them, trade volumes between China and Russia, the Czech Republic, and Ukraine grew the fastest, all above 20%. In terms of the total bilateral trade volume between China and the major countries in Africa and Oceania, in 2018, the bilateral trade volume between China and Australia was the highest, reaching $143.13 billion, far higher than that of the other three countries. In addition, in terms of growth rate, China's trade volume with South Africa, Morocco, Australia, and New Zealand all increased in 2018, among which the trade volume between China and Morocco grew the fastest, reaching 22.17%. Background: in 2014, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for the European Union and China to actively explore a bilateral free trade agreement. He said, "Together, we make up 1/3 of the global economy. We must actively explore the possibility of a free trade area and the goal of bringing annual bilateral trade to $1 trillion by 2020. We must work to make China and the EU the twin engines for global economic growth." This was the birth of the CAI between the two nations. The Comprehensive Agreement on Investment is a proposed investment deal between the People's Republic of China and the European Union. The deal is the most ambitious agreement that China has ever concluded by significantly opening up its internal market to EU companies. For example, China has agreed to eliminate joint venture requirements, forced transfer of technology, equity caps, and quantitative restrictions in a number of sectors in which most of the EU's business in China operates. It will also protect EU foreign direct investment in China in the manufacturing sector, where half of the EU's FDI is. China will match the EU's openness, a concession that had previously been unprecedented in Chinese trade or investment agreements, and which is viewed as a significant step towards market liberalization in China. This deal marks increasing common interest and cooperation between the EU and China, since China is now the EU's second biggest trading partner behind the US, and the EU, China's biggest trading partner. This will contribute to China's employment opportunities and rising labor standards. This next video that will be played shows the successful completion and signing of the agreement.
China has reached an investment deal with the 27-member European Union that will open new market opportunities for businesses for both sides.
The European Union and China on Wednesday inked a major investment deal following 7 years of negotiations. The agreement in particular will grant greater access for European companies to the Chinese market. European companies will be given additional access to many of China's industries, including the electric car and hybrid vehicle sectors, as well as private hospitals, telecoms, and cloud services. Speaking during a video conference with European leaders, Chinese President Xi Jinping said the deal showcases Beijing's determination and confidence in opening up its market. He added that the agreement will offer a better business environment and wider markets for investors from both sides.
China and the EU, as two of the world's largest economies and important forces for stability, have achieved an investment agreement which supports multilateralism and economic globalization. The agreement is a contribution to a more open world economy, and it will help to stabilize and develop the world industrial and supply chain, as well as world economic recovery.